and gentlemen, welcome back to the Multiverse Infinitum podcast, where today I'm joined with,
Gareth.
and we're doing the uh, uninhabited land discussion in the United States. We'll be going over quite a few different topics, so if you're interested in the debate and the discussion, um, stick around. And without further ado, here we go. First thing on our topics, we're going to go over farming. How big is it in this country, and how much of our large landmass is farmland?
Yeah, and so this is something I actually just got to witness personally when I was flying to from Colorado to Boston. So I flew over a large portion of the United States, and I spent a lot of time looking out my window during those times. And also, they have a new satellite feature on the plane, which allows you to just kind of like track your flight and then where you are. It shows you all kinds of cool stuff with like your altitude and your plane's velocity, but it also lets you zoom in on a satellite image of the United States. I think it's the same one that the pilot gets to see. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
And you can tell pretty basically everything that's not mountainous or protected land in the United States is pretty much farmland. It just stretches for hundreds, thousands of miles
Mm.
across this country. Almost all of the usable land is developed, especially places that where they have adequate drinking water or adequate water to farm these crops. So you see that a little bit less in like desert states like New Mexico, but it's pretty consistent across the land.
Okay, so would you say that this is not as applicable to coastal states as well, or
Oh, I think it's even more applicable to coastal states where they have lots of water. You know,
yeah, California being like the farming
exactly.
state? Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. All right. Well, I think that does segue really well into the next topic, which is state parks and natural areas, because I think maybe a lot of people would say, well, why can't I just have this cabin in the woods? Because look at all this forest that we have too, especially we're in the Rocky Mountains, like it stretches from Mexico to Canada. People would say, well, the government owns a whole bunch of stuff that we could be living, and they want to condense us into smaller areas.
Yeah, I really see the argument for that, especially, and I think this is a really big part of that argument is the presence of green belt around almost all of our national highways in the United States. And a green belt is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a belt of undeveloped land on either side of the highway. And it's designed to make traveling more appealing to the individual and hide mass deforestation, especially within the United States. It's something you can really see if you go to the Great Redwood Forest. They have these like little sections where these massive trees are preserved, but the vast majority of the land around there has been, cut down and developed
Yeah.
for farmlands. And so you
Mm.
even, especially in the redwoods, where you can see past the trees are so tall that you can see these clearings past the dense forested areas. I think these green belts really play a large, and they're no secret. You can go online and look it up. They were designed at the same time our highways were to make travel more appealing. Um, but I think they play a large role in the idea that there's a lot of undeveloped land. The undeveloped lands that we do have, there's a big statistic saying that almost all of it's government owned, and the reason for that is that anything that wasn't government owned, wasn't protected wilderness areas, has been developed into farmlands. And I think the reason that's super important, if you look at European countries, they have a much higher price for lumber and materials because they already had these major deforestation issues during, like kind of the Renaissance era. Um, and so they don't have a lot of that natural forest left. America is one of the only places where we actually had, thanks to Teddy Roosevelt, wilderness areas and protected lands built before mass development. A lot of these in these places, and so the only places left that are entirely wild are there because they were entirely protected. And so if you lose the protection for those wildlands, we permanently lose all of what's left. I think it would very quickly, if those government lands were to be released to the public, I think they would very quickly be bought up and developed, and you
Mm-hmm.
would see the idea of having a cabin in the woods is much more, kind of mythological.
Right.
Yeah,
Instead of, yeah, right now it's something where we're like, it could happen. It's like, dude, there could be no cabin, there could be no woods for your cabin.
yeah,
That makes sense. And I mean, even in South America, we've seen quite a bit of that, right, with the deforestation in the Amazon and the effects on the biodiversity and its ecosystem, as well
Oh
as
yeah.
like the ethical questions like uncontacted tribes.
Well, I don't know as much about that, but I know like it's a big problem with banana plantations right now.
Mm.
They take up a lot of space, and so they're a really big product of deforestation. And they attract elephants, so that you have these like massive migrating elephants.
They love bananas.
Well, they love bananas, but they also there's these banana factories and like new developments right in their migration paths,
Oh
and so
yeah.
they have less access to water, and then they get more attracted to these banana foundations. And you know the banana foundations, um, or plantations. There we go. Um,
Plantoons.
don't like when elephants come and eat all their bananas most of the time, and
Plantains.
so they'll like try to like you know there's only so many ways you can deal with a 25,000 or 2,500 pound animal.
And
They
what
often
countries?
attack them.
I
And,
just assume it's Africa because you're
yeah,
saying elephants, but in what countries are these?
that is specifically Africa since you brought it up.
I mean, that's a continent, but do you know any of
Oh,
the?
I don't know which country. No,
Okay, I heard somebody say Africa is a country in Egypt. I'm like, what?
that sounds pretty American. What are you going to do about the global perception that Americans don't understand geography?
Well, I think this is a yeah, that's a wild question, but I think this is a good point to kind of put us right back on track, which is something that I know you have a lot to say about, but I would like to bring some opposition just for discussion. But 15-minute cities, and how do you think that that discussion overall sort of like pans out,
So
or was
15-minute
started?
cities was something I wanted to bring up. And I know I was talking to you about this earlier. And I think it's really interesting because at its core, 15-minute cities is just a city planning technique. And so city planning isn't something that's new. We've
Right.
all, for hundreds of years, we've separated, or have worked to separate, huge industrial districts from huge or from urban areas and like residential areas.
Oh yeah,
And
look at
city planning on
Great
that level
Gatsby.
makes a lot of sense. And so to me, it's kind of an interesting issue that they'd be so demonized when at their core they're just a way to arrange buildings that will make it easier for people to access what they need. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And I think it stems from this idea that we have a huge dependency on automobiles in the United States, and that the average automobile costs like $35,000, and that's getting to be more and more difficult for the average American family to afford. And so I think at its core, or these 15-minute cities or urban planning ideas are really just to address that symptom and alleviate a reliance on automobiles because they are expensive, not only for individuals who have to keep paying for gas, but also for the environment and our eco footprint, which is,
So you're just saying
larger
as a
when you
volume.
have to travel further.
You're saying not as a medium, like vehicles are bad in general. You're just saying the volume in which we have them, like maybe we could reduce them to trucking and
Well, it's also the idea,
because how are you going to get the
I
stuff you
don't.
need?
Well, I've experienced this in my life where there's been times where I have been out of vehicle and my work was even just 3 miles away. It was took a lot of my time to bike everywhere
Hmm.
and to get my groceries, and it was difficult. And even in a city like Fort Collins, which has a great biking infrastructure, it might not even have been possible if the bike paths that were there didn't exist. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so, like,
Yeah, yeah. If you
yeah.
go to other cities in just even in the state, there's not very, there's not like bike lanes. There's not
Exactly. And so, like,
shelves.
you can imagine if my work was like 15 miles away and affordable housing was that far away from me, like, how would I have made it to work at all?
Hmm.
I don't know.
You
And so
need a
that's a big,
car.
you need a car. But I was too broke to get a car. So, like, where does that leave me? It's
So you
like,
create. I think the problem then is in more of a. Do you think there's an economic necessity or con a convenience necessity?
I think it's a little bit of both. Right? I think there's a lot of ways to address that issue. I'm not like this huge proponent for 15-minute
It
cities.
seems like it.
I'm not trying to promote them at all here. I'm just saying that I think it's strange that they're so demonized based on the
Mm,
idea that it really seems pretty much like in line with public transportation about it,
okay.
with me, and it's like that discussion of whether or not public transportation is worth the infrastructure has never been about good or evil. It's always been about, is it expensive enough? Can we do afford it? Can we afford it without tearing down people's homes in order to put up like bike paths and freeways or
Monorails.
yeah, things like that? That's a big part of it. Is like that's one some of the main aspects, but it's never been about like global control, and so it seems like a big jump to me from being kind of the same conversation. You know, I see 15-minute cities in the same aspect I see public transportation, and I
Mm.
think public transportation is probably a more feasible way to approach the transportation issue than 15-minute cities because it requires less infrastructure rearrangement. But I don't see why they're different conversations.
Do you remember in Battletoads when they had the train tracks go through their apartment?
Yeah.
They're like, we're so broke.
Yep.
And also in Wanted, which is a pretty good movie from back in the day with Angelina Jolie. Um, he lives in this really shitty apartment in this city in a broke part of the city, and the train tracks will go right next to his window, so every day he's off. So I think there could be something to be said about the negatives of public transportation, both for the cost of infrastructure, but also the maybe the traffic that it could cause, or the I mean, I'm trying to really steel man these arguments, but I don't see them going anywhere. I think public transportation is a good thing, and as somebody
Right?
who rode the bus a lot as a kid, I
Exactly.
think it's good. And but maybe it's because we have a really good infrastructure and we have good bike paths, and we're just really like kind of spoiled in that sense. And maybe in like larger cities where the population is so much higher and there's so much more like tax, quote unquote, on the system, where there's just so much more of a demand for these systems at subways and stuff like that. Whereas we can see it done very successfully, even in a populated density area like Japan, where they do they do this really cool thing where women who are like 50 and older who aren't really in the workplace but they want to do stuff and like help out, they will hop on the train and everybody will wait 5 minutes and they'll clean the train in between stops, and then everybody will flood in and they'll get so packed like they're literally touching, and it's just everybody's completely like cordial and calm, and there's
Yeah, it's just how
low
you get what you
crime.
do in
So
the way
I
around.
think I don't think that there's a good argument to say, well, the more people there is, public transportation is terrible. It's like, well, you can get along, you can make it work, and they do around the world. But I just think it's interesting in places like New York and Chicago, and with things like the L and the monorail and stuff like that in St. Louis, that like they have a harder time with the tax that's on the infrastructure they have and the funding that they have for that public transportation. That it's like you might as well get a freaking hoverboard or electric scooter, or in Uber's got a Tesla because he's like, dude, I can make a fortune. You know what I mean? Like it's just creates unique opportunities and solutions for people who are innovative, and it's harder for the people who it's always harder for, which are the lowest denominator of poor people that have the hardest time getting to work. Like you were saying, an economic incentive to have maybe free public transportation
Yeah.
or infrastructure for things like bikes.
I do kind of want to redirect the conversation back to this idea of 15-minute cities because I do want to
Well,
hear the
urban
arguments
planning is
against them.
next. So
Okay.
you're saying, well, that's why I wanted to get if it was a convenience issue or a economic issue, because I think from a convenience standpoint, oh yeah, everything is right here. It's cool. I can just go here and I can go here and I can walk to my favorite, and then I'm right back in my apartment. Everything's cool and I got my everything connected to Wi-Fi. Blah blah blah. But in an ideal world, in an idealistic understanding, but I think from a realistic perspective, as somebody who has seen not only my own perspective as a 20 something year old, but people who are deeper into their 40s and 50s, that you want some space, you want some freedom, you want some agency, you want some responsibility, you want some opportunity. And that is not really allotted when you just stick a whole bunch of people into a small amount of space and say, you have to have these jobs that are available and do these things and follow these laws in these strict ways and live your life in this way, or you literally can't survive. And that's why I think we also see a large homeless population in a lot of these condensed cities because they don't want to play this game and there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, or there's in a lot of the cases either through drug addiction or mental illness.
Exactly, that's a
There are
huge
reason
contributor. That's a
they
huge
can't play
contributor.
the game, and it's not even about wanting to or not.
That's a good point.
Um,
So if we have this infrastructure for the people that's so convenient and they can do all this stuff, and the people who are unable or unwilling, uh, in their own front, they're like, oh, I just want to have chickens and like have cows and like go and work on a farm and like, you know, learn stuff. There's nowhere for them to do that. And we see that diminishing more and more as time goes on. And I think that's why those things like higher population density cities, and especially these 15-minute cities, because it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, to where what's the end point? Are we just going to be sitting in our room and we'll have everything delivered to our door and we'll just eat through a tray and we'll be on VR and we'll be in Hawaii so we'll never have to travel, we'll never have to leave, and our credit score is, we'll just say all the appropriate things so that we can still get that food through the tray.
I think
I think that that's maybe an extreme example, and I watch a lot of sci-fi movies, but
so. Here's what I really think about that. I think that there's a certain percentage of the population that is okay with that. I think there's a certain percentage of the population that, given the opportunity, that's what they would do. And then there's a much greater percentage of the population, like you and like me, and probably like a lot of our viewers, that given the opportunity to do that, they would not. That they would get
that's
up and
prison,
leave.
bro.
Well, they would leave. And I think that the idea that infrastructure would make people so dependent on it, it's the idea of like, if there's a train in order to leave, then it makes that more realistic. It makes it more realistic for even the bottom level of society that doesn't have the money for a cow or a chicken or any land. And as our population grows and we're kind of like, um, in dense cities, people move there, and there's a lot of economic reasons to live in a city. But I think a lot of people will never have the freedom to be able to escape just due to the imperfections of reality.
Mm.
We kind of are codependent creatures, and we need community in order to live, in order to access food and water.
Right.
Um,
I don't think isolation is. I think there's a
yeah,
middle ground,
and so I
like
think the
town level.
infrastructure makes that more possible, and I don't think I think the people that are going to be willing to just stay in home do and are, and the people that are going to go out and like create the world do and are. And I don't think that. I think the infrastructure will allow the people that actually do to do more, even if
You
it
don't
also
think
allows the people that don't to do less.
you don't think that it's limiting people who would potentially, maybe they're born into this situation and now they can't leave this terrible low income neighborhood and go have a higher economic or social or educational opportunity because simply where they were born. I don't think that that is a marker of freedom. I think that that's the opposite. I think that's creating environments to keep people where they are and to control them because now you own everything that's within that 15 minutes. You control the prices, you control the jobs, you control the
So what you're worried
standards.
about more is a monopoly from like
No, just a controlled state.
a controlled state. So that'd be
It,
like,
we were talking earlier about too of like there could be 12 brands on the shelf and it's literally one company that owns all 12 brands.
yeah.
So maybe there's an illusion of choice in a city and there's all these billboards and all these things and there's but really everyone's riding the train, everyone's got an office job, everyone watches Netflix, you know what I mean? It's all controlled. It's all very manageable. It's all very dull. There's not a lot of artistic expression or philosophical motivation or even the struggle of the human condition. And I think that's why we see a lot of these diagnoses in these cities too, like depression, anxiety, ADHD, because they're literally crunched down, artificial, locked down, like screens, jobs, sitting, and then they want to go to the gym and try to make it work and then there's a whole culture beyond that in city gyms versus like that's why the advent of home gyms in the past couple of years have grown, just like the advent of people getting chickens and trying to get land and the opposition to this oppression that is sold onto us. It's like you're gonna own nothing, you're gonna rent it, you're gonna be happy, you're gonna sit there and just live in your dull existence and have no meaning because life has no meaning. And I think that that is even if that is what is being pushed, I think that's a dull worldview and it's inhumane. And I think history would agree with me.
I don't think anyone's pushing for that. I think we're
The
just
world, the
experiencing the symptoms of a growing populace within cities. And there's a lot of ways that electronics and technology interact with that. And maybe we see some of the negative aspects of those and we perceive them as being pushed. But you know, the only people that I really see pushing for that is like major grocery stores and like maybe like
the
apps
World
like
Health
Instagram.
Organization, dude.
They just want you to stay at home.
Yeah, the World Economic Forum. I'm sorry, I did the World Economic Forum. The ones that are supposed to tell us how everything is supposed to go, and they Klaus Schwab, who's the head of the World Economic Forum. He looks like a literal fucking villain out of a movie, but he even wrote a book about it. But they're incentivizing a global plan called the global reset or the new reset, something like that, and it's going to change how currency works around the world. And I mean, this is all verifiable too. World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab. This is not hidden information. He's done he's done press conferences at the summit and many and documented. Like I said, he literally wrote the Great Reset. He wrote a book about it, and it's well reported as well, like on news organizations. And I think that's the end goal. And one of the things in that is he says, "You will own nothing. You'll be happy."
Well, I can't speak on the World Economic Forum because I've
That's who
never.
literally controls, not
Well,
conspiratorially. That's who literally controls the the economy of global trade and the value of currency.
well, I'll have to do a little bit of reading about that because I can almost guarantee that they individually do not control that. And there's a lot of things like there's a lot to it. The value of a dollar within a given country, and so they even if they might be able to influence that through like tariffs and taxes and political um, posturing, I can almost guarantee they don't entirely control it. They might
That's a
have
good
some
point.
influence. They might have
Some
even a lot of influence in some
okay, I would
places,
say a lot.
but and it's going to vary depending on where they are too. Countries that ascribe to that are going to be clearly more influenced by it than countries that don't.
Right,
And so
that's
like
true. Malaysia is not
yeah,
like,
and so
but in Malaysia they have
and
chickens
I suppose it
and
really relates back to that same ideology, which is we're going to need to figure out how to make better cities, and we're going to need to figure out how to make cities that work for people, and we're also going to figure out how to be American with it and retain our freedoms as individuals. And I think both are possible. And even if there are agendas from both sides, I think there's a lot of push against things like a reduced oil and carbon input, largely because it is so wildly profitable for a lot of people. And I think there are people on both sides of the political spectrum, both using climate change propaganda against climate change, saying it's not real in order to make money. And then there's people that are trying to make money on the other side of the political spectrum, which is like, if we create a 15-minute city, and how are we going to get on top of that? And so you see negative evils kind of coming from both sides based on the desire of money. And I don't think that's
well,
new.
those are
But it doesn't
extremes though.
mean, yeah, but it doesn't mean that the fundamental idea that we can make a city that is both American and effective for most people. Um,
Do you
I
think
don't
that
think
that
that's a.
eliminates
I don't think
cars?
that's a pipe dream. I
Do you,
don't think it eliminates cars, but I
so what do you
don't think
think?
it eliminates the fundamental need for them.
Hmm.
I don't think that you're ever going to get a place without cars. I think it's too valuable. I think the freedom is too valuable, and that well, so long as people can buy cars, they will. And I think that's all right. But what you're looking to alleviate is the dependency on them, especially for people that can't afford or don't want to own a car. I'd like to see a world where you can like maybe ride the bus to the grocery store or like There's a little bit more. There's more places like Fort Collins where you have really great access to things through bike paths.
So
Um,
think of this though. The jobs that you're limited to there without your vehicles must be within that city. And the jobs that get are the jobs that create the things that everything are given to you, like the cars that are manufactured or whatever other manufacturing needs, since they're so separated from the public, are not available to those people who are in those cities. So there's
but there
immediately a
already are.
separation of class between the people who can travel or be in the manufacturing areas and the people who are in the areas that benefit from the manufacturing, even though it's so far away and remote, and they don't have access to travel into those locations because their agency has been limited based on their vehicle.
That is already true, though. All of that is already true with the dependency of need for vehicles. All of that still happens.
What do you think about the middle ground? The middle ground, though, of like suburban areas.
Suburban areas. I don't
Yeah,
see any reason we can't have more buses, except that
just
people.
bus us through the suburban areas and you don't have your own car. That sounds like communist, dude.
I think you're on the side that you think everyone should have their own car, but I'm on the side that I don't
It's
think
more
it's
agency.
possible.
It if you want a car, you can get a car. People who have a car. People who want a car have a car. Like
Oh, the people that you just want it into existence.
no, people who want a car, I think should have the freedom to have a car. And if you don't want a car, I don't think that we need to structure society around the people who don't want to have a car.
So the freedom to having a car is different from having a need for a car. And so you can eliminate some of the need to have a car without having infringing at all upon the ability to own one. Does
Where's your
that make sense?
how far is your 15-minute city from the mountains? What if you want to go for a hike?
Then
What if you want to go
go
for
for
a
a hike. No one's
picnic?
telling you not to own a
How
car.
can you? You're saying though, in these 15-minute cities,
I'm not even a
that
huge
they're.
proponent for 15-minute cities. I've said that like 3 times
I
now.
know, but you just keep pushing the idea of that it would be valuable, and I'm saying maybe there's a middle ground where there's suburban areas where there are these condensations and there are these conveniences and there are these benefits of having larger groups of people in these areas and the convenience of the people being able to live in the city who want to live in the city. But if you want to live outside of the city and have the benefits of that as well as the agency to be able to check out and have the freedom to travel, I think that those areas should be available and have the option. And I think that the prevalence of and the pushing of the ideas of everything needs to be condensed, and we need to, and all these other areas the government needs to own and keep wild, and it's all farmland and we're not allowed to touch it. But this little area you're allowed to be in, and you can have the jobs here, and you can have the food here, and you can live here.
No one's saying that you're allowed to be in that area. No one's taking. Why do you see that as such a
I'm literally
like
talking
the
about.
option for it to exist is a threat to suburbia?
I'm asking, what do you think about the suburban condition as it relates to the 15-minute city versus a metropolis like.
I think it's expensive and it takes up a lot of land, and you see a quick erosion of the middle class in America that can actually afford those places.
I don't think anybody can hear you.
Uh, well, I think that there's an erosion uh, there's an erosion of the middle class in America, and that the people that can afford to live in these kinds of places are dwindling. And so it's not that we're trying to take away, or that anybody is trying to take away individual houses. It's that more individuals cannot afford them. And so it's not about not owning a
But why
car,
is
anyone
that?
trying to make you not own a car. It's about the option, the not have necessarily having the need for it. Does
Why
that make
can't
sense?
they afford it? Because they're
That's a
having
huge economic discussion.
it. I mean, it could, but as it relates to this
Can you
discussion,
afford a house or a car? I guess you have a car.
I can I can't afford a car. But the
Do you
point,
pay your insurance?
I do pay my own insurance. First of all, there's a lot of personal questions that have nothing to do with the debate, and that's your
Well,
your
I am
rhetoric.
curious to see because your perspective is so like
I'm not talking only from personal experience. I'm trying to give you facts and state stuff. And if you
I
want
can
to look
see.
up what I'm saying, there's arguments for what I'm saying. I'm not just pulling shit out of my ass and saying, well, I think as a privileged kid who has everything paid for me and I have my own car that I should be free. No, I'm literally trying to state arguments and steelman certain arguments as well as hear your point of view. And like you said, you're not a huge proponent for 15-minute cities. I personally think I enjoy the convenience of being able to go to the game store, go to the gym, go to the grocery store, go right to my house, and everything's just quick and easy. And if I wanted to, I could walk or ride my bike or drive my car and have the freedom. I just think that there is a discussion to be had for the dwindling of our agency in this country. And I think the economic discussion of saying, well, if you only can afford to live in this little area, it's because you are only having the jobs that are in this little area, unless you do work remote and have a certain skill. But I mean, those things are also dependent on like genetic factors mostly. So if you're not smart enough, quote unquote, and you can't leave this place and you can't get a job, high paying job enough, then you don't have another option other than what we see a lot in lower IQ and lower like poverty people who come from poverty going to the military and higher paying manufacturing jobs like oil and stuff like that too.
Okay, but that's already true.
I
All of
know it's
that.
true. I'm
Yeah.
just describing the reality of the situation. I'm not saying like here's where it could go. I'm trying to say here's why I think it's dangerous. And I think that that's why people can't afford. And if we had more self-reliance and stability and less reliance on the government and public state controlled things like where you get your food and what kind of job can you have and where you
Neither of those are state control.
what do you mean?
Where you get your food and what
I'm
kind of
not
job you
saying
have are not
state.
at all state
When
controlled.
I said state because I'm not literally talking about like federal and state. I'm talking about like 1984 state where the society has controlled the rules and it is oligarchical and monopolistic, but it's not like dependent on those factors. So I'm more, and this is not my ideas. This is George Orwell, 1984. This is a an unfurling of a idea of like this is where things could go wrong. Oh, you're going in the wrong direction. Like the beginning of the movie, like they're fucking up. They're not paying attention. They should have saw at this point this was where the crux. And then holy shit, we're literally all fucking sitting in our prison cells waiting for the food token to come through the hole, and we're like, how did we get here? Please turn on Netflix so I can escape my reality.
I see.
Like that's scary.
That is scary.
But I think we got to pretty much everything on the list except for the last one. So I think it'd be apropos to finish with it. And I have a little story with it as well. But how would these people also in these cities, outside of observatories and models and graphs and computer generations, be able to see and enjoy the stars of the sky? It's really hard in the city.
Well, I mean, yeah, you'd have to have a
Like
green
really
light
hard.
day. And there's a few cities that have observed this in the past to some sort of miraculously resistant people, but which is night days, which is or nights, which is where the city basically turns off the lights so the populace can see. But that's pretty much
That's
the only
interesting.
solution to light pollution is either that or like fewer lights within the city. But I
Or
don't think
more remote
anyone's going
areas.
to say argue for more poorly lit city streets to encourage accidents and things. So
I
there
don't think so
there
either.
are inherent flaws with like community living, but it doesn't make it less mandatory. You know what I mean?
I'm just saying it feels less and less human the more I break it down. And that is one thing that I personally think, and maybe it's hippy dippy, but I think it's inherent to the human condition to sort of experience the night sky and wonder. And you take that away from a lot of people when outside of those, which I do admit is a good point, those observatory windows where we're like, shit, maybe even the city's like, we're cutting the power for 2 hours tonight.
Yep.
So be prepared. Like nobody will be able to flick their shit. Like, but then do people have generators? And there's a lot of like ethical questions about that. But I just didn't know about that. That's interesting that the cities have observed that in the past. But when I was in Oklahoma, I went this trucker's route because I was really confident in how much gas we had. and there's not even a green belt. You literally look out and it's all nothing as far as you can see, and it's like 80 miles of that. I think it's actually 180 miles, but something that's crazy like that. And in the middle of it, I'm like chilling, no radio. The radio didn't work, and my phone didn't have reception, so I'm just going. And then all of a sudden, I'm like looking, I'm like, holy crap, it is insanely bright outside. So I pull the lights out. I keep rolling though, because I don't want to turn the car off. And I roll my window down. I look out, and it's literally like a freaking a space museum or something where everything is so lit up and colorful and bright. I'm like, right here in Oklahoma, just a couple hours outside of quote unquote civilization, there's this crazy beauty and wonder. And I wonder how much we lose of that when everything is federally owned and you live in a little tiny city that has all this light pollution and obstruction. But something to think about. And
I think I think anyone that lives in a city already experiences that. But also, I don't know. If we're talking about just the stars, I really do appreciate getting outside. Growing up in the mountains, I've always appreciated the night sky in general, and I always wondered. And so there's been times where I've lived in places that have a really high light pollution and haven't been able to look at the stars. And for me, that was a pretty big personal impact. Just because I definitely enjoy my stargazing time, and I do try to like find constellations and stuff like that. Um, Speaking of which, we have an amazing abundance of shooting stars and ability to see them here in Colorado. I've seen so many since I moved here. Um,
I think it's also cool that you can just take a short drive up to the mountains and then see at
yeah,
nighttime, and it's so like
that is cool.
so. I think a middle ground is the best, and we are really blessed where we live. But unfortunately, the Coloradoan published something I think yesterday or a couple days ago that said Fort Collins is the most peaceful city in the United States. So I think
Really?
that, along with our current housing downfall, where everything's for sale, like nobody's buying houses, there's going to be an influx of people. So
Almost certainly.
I've been here my whole life. I'm born and raised, so it is what it is. Let it rock. Interesting discussion. Didn't really get too crazy, but I learned a few things. I hope you learned a few things. Not maybe knowledge, but at least from the other side's perspective of their argument.
I see, I see.
So
Yeah,
stuff.
keep tuning in,
Click the
and you
like
guys
button,
have a great night.
subscribe, and as always, have yourself a wonderful day. Peace.